Her hands never shook. That was the first thing anyone noticed about her if they were paying attention. Most of them were not. She was kneeling in the dirt beside a man twice her size, her gloved fingers pressing down on a wound that would have rattled someone with twice her experience. Blood had soaked through the first layer of gauze, and she was reaching for the second without looking the way a pianist reaches for the next key without glancing down. Muscle memory, deep memory, the kind that does not live in the brain. Around her, men were shouting. Radio traffic cut in and out. Someone was calling for a vehicle. Someone else was arguing about the fastest route to the aid station. She was not arguing about anything. She pressed. She counted. She spoke in a voice so level it almost seemed like a different language from everything happening around it. Stay with me. Eyes open. Tell me your daughter's name. The man blinked up at her. Badly hurt people always look confused, like the pain has rearranged the furniture inside their mind and they cannot find the door. Ellie, he said. Good. Keep saying it. She did not look up. She already knew the position of every person in that clearing, the distance to the nearest cover, the temperature drop coming with the wind off the Rockies. She had cataloged all of it in the first 4 seconds after she hit the ground. Her father had taught her that. You walk into any room, any field, any situation in the first 4 seconds, you know where everything is. After that, you focus. After that, you work. She worked. They called her just a medic. They would not use that word for long. Fort Carson, Colorado sits at the foot of Pikes Peak like something ancient decided the mountain needed a guardian. The base is a city inside a fence, tens of thousands of acres, dozens of units. The kind of place where a person can be entirely unremarkable and entirely extraordinary at the same time, and no one notices the difference until it matters. It mattered on November the 4th, 2024. That was the first day of the Joint Advanced Tactical Medicine course, a 14-day program designed for operators preparing for their next deployment cycle. The attendees were Navy SEALs and Army Special Forces soldiers, men who had already spent years learning to do impossible things. This course was not about making them capable. They were already capable. It was about making sure they did not bleed out before they had the chance to be, which was why the course needed a medic. HM2. Sarah Calloway arrived at 0630 on a Tuesday morning, 40 minutes before anyone else, and stood outside the assigned briefing room with her gear bag over one shoulder and a cup of bad coffee in her other hand. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall. She weighed 118 pounds. She had dark hair pulled back at the base of her neck, brown eyes that moved across a room quickly, and a stillness about her that people sometimes mistook for shyness. It was not shyness, it was economy. She had learned a long time ago not to waste anything, not movement, not words, not attention. She read the duty roster taped to the door. 14 names, all male. Ranks from E7 to O5. She found her own name at the bottom. HM2 Calloway, medical support. She drank her coffee and waited. The first of them arrived at 0658, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Briggs. 39 years old, 6 feet 2, with the build of a man who had spent 2 decades making his body into a weapon and maintained it out of habit. He came down the hallway with his gear bag on his back, did not see Sarah until he was nearly past her and stopped. He gave her the full look boots to face one practice second, then glanced down the hallway as if expecting someone else. Someone more expected. He said nothing. He walked inside. Lieutenant Commander Garrett Voss arrived 2 minutes later with 3 men behind him. 47 years old, lean in the way distance runners are lean with close-cropped gray at his temples and eyes that read situations before they finish developing. He had commanded elements in Iraq, Afghanistan, and places that did not make the news. In 2019, he had lost a corpsman, a young man who was well-meaning and well-trained, and had still made a critical error under pressure that cost another man his leg. Since that day, Voss held every medic to a standard some people called unreasonable. He called it the minimum. He saw Sarah. He processed her. He moved inside without breaking stride. Last came Specialist Kyle Decker, 21 years old, still carrying the last remnants of a civilian haircut, with the eager energy of someone who had not yet learned to wear his training like a second skin. He nearly walked into her. He caught himself. He gave her a wide-eyed look. "You're Doc Calloway." "Yes." "Cool, yeah, cool." He went inside. She finished her coffee. The briefing was run by Voss, efficient, clear, thorough. He covered the schedule, objectives, protocols, range safety communications, and the medical support structure. One line HM2 Calloway would be embedded with the team for the duration. He did not introduce her separately. He did not ask her to speak. Her name was on the schedule, and that was sufficient. Afterward, in the staging area, Briggs sat on an equipment crate and pulled up his left sleeve. A long scrape along his forearm from a training incident 2 days prior Red edge slightly swollen, not infected, but needing proper cleaning. Sarah walked over. She crouched and opened her bag. Briggs pulled his sleeve back down. I'm good. That needs to be cleaned and dressed. I've had worse. I know, it still needs attention. He met her eyes. Not hostility, something more calculated. The look of a man applying a standard she had not yet met. Until she did, he was not offering anything. Not his forearm, not his trust, not his consideration. I'll get it later, he said. She stood. She closed her bag. Let me know, she said and moved on. That afternoon, Voss ran the first tactical scenario in the lower range area. Movement, casualty, extraction, communication protocols. Sarah's role was observation and standby medical. She posted at the edge of the scenario area with her kit watching. Midway through, Decker jogged past and paused beside her. Hey doc, you know how to use an M4? I was just asking because sometimes medics go through the basic qualification course, and I thought maybe she was watching the movement on the range. She did not answer. I mean, not a big deal. I was just Decker. Yeah, I'm watching. He waited, then nodded and moved on. Later, he would tell people she had not seemed offended. She had seemed like someone who knew exactly where her attention needed to be, and it needed to be on the range. The second day began at 5:45, and it was warm in a way that November in Colorado should not have been warm. The altitude played tricks. Thin air at 6,000 feet meant the sun hit differently, and hydration moved faster than people expected, especially people who had been training closer to sea level. Specialist Harlan Webb, 34 years old, 11 years of service, a man who had survived things that would have ended. Most people sat down on the side of the trail during a movement exercise and did not get up. Voss assessed him in a few seconds. Tired, pushing himself past the early warning signs the way experienced operators do, because discomfort is something you move through. He almost called a 2-minute rest and kept the exercise going. Sarah was already beside Webb. She had 2 fingers at his neck, watching his eyes, her other hand flat against his forehead. She had been moving before Voss finished his assessment. His pulse is rapid and weak, skin is hot and dry. He stopped sweating, and he should still be sweating. Voss looked at her. He's been compensating since about 0900. His gait changed around 1000 proprioception issue. That happens early in stage 3 heat exhaustion. If he keeps going, you're looking at heat stroke in 15 minutes. After that, it becomes a hospital problem. He didn't report it. They never do. She already had water and electrolyte packs out ice from her trauma kit positioned at his neck and both armpits. Horizontal out of the sun, 30 minutes minimum, she said. Webb spent his 30 minutes in the shade, took 2 liters of fluids, and was fully functional by 1400. He ran the next scenario at 1600. Voss said nothing to Sarah directly, but that evening when she walked into the next morning's brief and took a seat, he let her stay. Small things, the beginning of something that was not yet respect, but was no longer dismissal. Chief Wade Cole was 44 years old with 18 years in naval special warfare, and the quiet, observant temperament of a man who had learned that important information almost always announces itself softly. He had watched Sarah for 2 full days, the way she moved through the team's spaces, not nervously, not with the over-careful politeness of someone proving a point, but with the ease of someone who knew this environment and its language. He had watched her hands during briefings, a controlled precision that felt practiced in ways that had nothing to do with medical training, and he had watched the moment with Decker's carbine. It happened fast. Decker came through the gear room moving quickly, and his slung M4 caught a shelving edge and swung toward the floor. Sarah was passing behind him. Without apparent thought, her right hand came out and caught the rifle by the grip. Her thumb finding the safety in the same motion, her eyes checking the chamber in one practiced movement. Then she stopped. Not because someone saw her, because she felt what her hands were doing, recognized it, and made a choice. She set the rifle on the shelf and continued walking. Cole had been the only person in the room facing that direction. He was not certain she knew he had seen it. That evening, he pulled her service record. Full jacket Navy Corpsman, advanced trauma certifications, deployment support in Kuwait and Germany, consistent high evaluations. Clean, thorough, exactly what you would expect. He ran supplementary searches, competition records, public archives, Colorado State Junior Marksmanship Championship, June 2014, Rifle Division 600 meters. First place, Sarah Calloway, age 16. The record was absent from every form she had ever submitted to the military. She had, at some point before she raised her right hand and took her oath, removed every trace of it from her official history. Cole sat with this for a long time. A person erases something from their record for one of two reasons. Either they are hiding a liability, or they are hiding a capability. And people who hide liabilities rarely also carry the specific quality of practice calm he had been watching for 2 days. He put the information away. He would know when to use it. The third day began cold, and there was a room on the north side of the operations building that had been empty for the first 2 days of the course. It was no longer empty. Commander Douglas Trent had been scheduled as senior advisor for the entire 14-day program. He had been looking forward to it in the specific way that retired operators look forward to involvement in training, not nostalgically, not because they miss the field, but because passing on what they know is the only work that feels complete in the same way. The evening before the course began, he had taken his usual early run along the base perimeter road. A vehicle had come around a blind corner in the pre-dawn dark and caught him on the shoulder of the road. He had gone down hard. The vehicle did not stop. 3 cracked ribs, significant shoulder trauma, a knee wrapped in compression bandage and elevated on a folded sleeping bag. He had refused evacuation to any medical facility with the force of personality of a man who has been deciding which orders he follows for 40 years. He was staying in the operations building. He was not missing this course entirely, even if he spent it horizontal. Sarah was assigned to check on him each morning. Vital signs, wound assessment, medication, review, documentation. He was cooperative, gruff, and completely uninterested in being fussed over, not a difficult patient, simply a man who found incapacity profoundly offensive and was managing his frustration with the dignified silence of someone who knows that expressing it changes nothing. She knocked on the door of the recovery suite at 0740 on the third morning. "Come in," he said. She came in. The room was dim, the single window facing north with the curtain half drawn. He was lying on the recovery cot with his eyes closed, hands folded over his stomach, breathing steady, close enough to consciousness that a knock brought him back in under a second. He looked like what he was, a man who had spent 4 decades inside one of the most demanding organizations in the world, and whose body carried the entire history of that service in its posture and its stillness and the way it occupied space even while lying down. The gray in his hair was steel-colored. The lines in his face were deep cut by weather and tension and years of squinting into conditions most people would have found intolerable. Sarah set her bag on the small table and began removing what she needed. Blood pressure cuff, pulse oximeter, fresh bandage roll for the shoulder wrap. She moved quietly. She did not make conversation. She had learned in her first year working with the combat veterans that most of them did not want to be talked at during assessment. They wanted the work done efficiently and with minimum fuss. She was wrapping the blood pressure cuff around his left arm when he opened his eyes. His eyes were gray, the same steel shade as his hair, and fully alert in the way that has nothing to do with how long a person has been awake. Some people's eyes wake up in stages. His were simply on or off. He looked at her face. In the particular silence of that moment, the kind of person only recognizes afterward, when trying to explain what happened and finding the sequence makes sense, but the feeling of it resists description. Something changed in him. Not gradually, not the slow adjustment of a man recalibrating a first impression. It was instantaneous, the way a sky changes in the second a lightning bolt crosses it. Something in his expression moved. Then something in his body moved. Before she could process what was happening, he was sitting upright on the cot with the focused urgency of a man who has just received information that overrides everything else. Calloway. His voice in that small room was like something large falling. She took one step back. Not far the involuntary step a body takes when an unexpected sound arrives at close range. Her training caught her in the same instant, pulling her back to the present, to the blood pressure cuff in her hand and the work she was doing. From the hallway through the half-open door, she heard movement stop. Trent was staring at her. Not past her, at her, with the specific quality of a man who is looking at something that should not be possible and is trying to understand what the word impossible actually means. "You're James's daughter," he said, not a question. The words landed somewhere below words. She stood in that cold room with the cuff in her hand and James Calloway's name suspended in the air between them, and felt something she had not felt in a long time, the particular sensation of ground shifting underfoot when no ground has actually moved. She had heard her father's name from military people before. At his memorial, in the administrative period after his death, when officers had come to the house with paperwork and condolences in that order. She had heard it occasionally since from people who had known him in passing. She had never heard it spoken like this. Not with this weight, not with this quality of something long held finally releasing. "I'm here to check your vitals, Commander," she said. Her voice was steady. She had worked very hard for a very long time to keep it that way. If you'd like to talk after the assessment, I have time. He looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly he settled back onto the cot. All right, he said, all right. After she left the recovery suite, she stood in the hallway for a moment with her bag over her shoulder and her inventory list in her hand. She read the same line 4 times without registering it. She folded the list and put it in her pocket. The team was running a communications drill in the staging area. She took her post at the medical station, set down her kit, and began reviewing the afternoon supply inventory. Cole was 30 feet away examining a piece of equipment that did not appear to require this much attention. At 1100, Briggs came to the medical station with an equipment form requiring her signature. He set it on the table. She signed it without reading it first, which was not like her, and he noticed. You're distracted, he said. Neutral, not unkind. I'm not. He picked up the form. He studied her for a moment with his appraising look. Trent called your name. Some of the guys heard it. He knew my father, she said. We'll talk later. Briggs waited 1 beat. Then he walked away. She returned to the drill, men moving through a scenario coordinates called over radio decisions made in 3-second windows. She watched and she cataloged and she kept the interior part of herself, the part that had heard her father's name spoken by a man who had clearly been carrying it for a long time, in the place where she kept things that needed to wait. Her father had died in 2009 in a province in eastern Afghanistan. She had looked up on a map many times since, which looked on a map like any unremarkable place. She had been 11 years old. She had already been shooting for 2 years. He had started teaching her when she was 10. Patient, precise, serious in the way of a man who understood that what he was teaching mattered not as recreation, not merely as heritage, but as preparation for what he never specified entirely. Maybe he did not know. Maybe he knew exactly and chose not to say. After his funeral, he had gone back to the yard alone the day after the burial before her mother was awake. She had not told anyone. She had set up the target at the fence post where her father always set it, and she had shot until the light ran out, and she had done this every morning for 5 years because stopping felt like losing him a second time, and she was not ready for that. She won the state championship at 16 without telling her mother she had entered the competition, and the following week she removed every record of it from any form she would ever submit and put the rifle away. She had made a promise the night of the funeral, standing in the kitchen, while her mother was still in the clothes she had worn to the burial. She had made it because she could see what the weight of all of this was doing to her mother, and she could not remove the weight, but she could remove one specific piece of it. No more rifles. Said simply the way simple things are said when they are meant completely. Her mother had held her for a long time and said nothing. She had kept that promise for 10 years. She had joined the Navy as a corpsman because it was the closest she could get to her actual purpose without breaking the thing she had promised. Heal when you can. She had believed for 10 years that the second half of that sentence would never apply to her. At 2247, the radio went. She was in the medical supply room running the nightly inventory when she heard it not clearly, not through the main relay, but in the fragmented way signals arrive when something has broken the normal transmission sequence. Someone on an emergency channel, the signal cutting out. She caught the voice before she caught the words. Danny Sherwood, 23 years old, assigned to a night perimeter check in Sector 4. His voice had the specific quality of someone who is injured and still trying to function, using the last of their control to push the right words through. Man down Sector 4, liver rounds. Then nothing. She was already running before the nothing arrived, her bag over her shoulder, her hands free, her knowledge of the ground between the operations building and Sector 4 already assembled and waiting. The mountain stood at the edge of the darkness beyond the fence line, white-peaked and permanent. It had seen this before. It would see it again. She did not look at it. She ran. She heard Sherwood before she saw him. Not his voice he had stopped transmitting, but his breathing fast and shallow and wrong, in the way breathing goes wrong when the body is compensating for something it cannot compensate for indefinitely. She adjusted her angle without slowing, came around the left side of an equipment storage structure, and found him on the ground with his back against the wall and both hands pressed against his left thigh. The blood was significant. She dropped to her knees before she had fully stopped moving. Sherwood, eyes on me. He looked at her, the particular pale of someone whose body had begun prioritizing which systems got the remaining supply, and the face was not at the top of that list. His hands were in the right place, that was instinct, and it was correct, and they were shaking, which was not his fault. Don't talk. Keep your hands exactly where they are. She had the tourniquet out. The wound was high on the thigh, close to the femoral region. which meant placement had to be precise because imprecise placement was barely better than no tourniquet at all. She moved his hands, assessed the wound in 2 seconds, positioned the tourniquet 4 inches above, and pulled it tight. With the efficiency of someone who understands that this particular procedure has no version that gets easier by going slowly. Sherwood made a sound. She did not apologize. She tightened and locked. How long ago did it happen? 4 minutes, maybe 4.5. I called it right away. She was already calculating. 4.5 minutes of active bleeding from a wound that size. She applied combat gauze directly, impressed with both hands, speaking in the level voice she used when keeping someone's nervous system from running. The wrong calculation was part of the treatment. You are going to be all right. Breathe slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Just that. Give me that. He breathed. Footsteps on gravel. Voss arrived first, then Briggs, then Cole, with 2 others behind him. They spread without being told, taking positions that turned the open area into a perimeter. A flashlight angled down to give Sarah working light without compromising anyone's night vision outward. Voss crouched beside her for 1 second. He looked at the wound, the tourniquet, the gauze. He looked at Sherwood's face. He stood and turned to the perimeter. Status. Cole had his rifle up. Movement approximately 900 meters, 11 o'clock, elevated position. Structure on the ridge. Silhouette intermittent. Light discipline. Nobody along the north line. Briggs was already against the storage structure, binoculars up. 1 individual. Elevated prone using a structure corner for concealment. Long gun. Optics. A pause that said more than words. He is not a training asset. Nobody spoke for a moment. There are situations that a person prepares for in the abstract, runs in simulation, discusses in briefings, and then one day encounters in fact. And the factual version has a texture and a weight the abstract version never captures. This was that moment. The 14-day joint training course had just become something else, and the recalibration happened fast because trained people recalibrate fast. But the fraction of a second where the mind corrects from the expected to the actual, that fraction existed. Sarah was not recalibrating. She was monitoring Sherwood's color and counting his pulse with 2 fingers at his neck and making adjustments to the pressure on his wound. She was inside a problem that was entirely contained and entirely defined, and she was solving it. Doc, Voslow, assessment it. Femoral region possibly clipped the artery. Tourniquet is controlling it. He needs surgery, but not in the next 30 minutes. I can keep him stable. Can he move? Not under his own power, not yet. Voss straightened and looked at the ridge, then at his team. He was running calculations, threat position, available cover, angles, extraction options. None of them were good. The elevated position commanded the open ground between their location and the operations building. Moving a non-ambulatory casualty across that ground without suppression was a significant problem. He keyed his radio and called for QRF. The response told him what he needed to know in 12 words. Nearest available unit, 38 minutes. 38 minutes is a very long time in some situations and a very short time in others. Right now it was both. Cole again. He's adjusting, better angle on the road. Oru Briggs, our sniper, Voss, looked at Petty Officer Renner, who was the team's designated marksman, and who was currently against a concrete block with his right arm in a compression wrap from a training injury that had not affected his performance in any exercise they had run. At 800 meters in low light, with the fine motor requirement of precision, shooting a wrap on the dominant arm was a different conversation. Renner met his gaze. He did not pretend. I can try. I cannot guarantee. A commander facing an unacceptable situation runs every option against every variable and arrives at the least bad answer. Voss did this in 4 seconds. The options were accept that the man on the ridge would dictate the terms of the next 38 minutes or suppress the threat with the assets available. A voice came from behind them. Commander Douglas Trent had come out of the operations building under his own power, which should not have been possible given 3 cracked ribs and a wrapped knee and the instructions of every medical authority who had seen him in the past 48 hours. He was moving with the determination of a man who has decided that his body's current limitations are a negotiation he is not participating in. He was carrying a rifle case. His injured shoulder sat lower than the other. His jaw was set. He crossed the gravel and opened the case and took out the M24, the bolt-action sniper rifle, a system Trent had shot for more than 2 decades in conditions that made this one look comfortable. He held it now with the knowledge of a man who understood exactly what his body could and could not do tonight. His shoulder would not bear the position. He knew this without trying. He knew it the way old operators know their bodies completely without sentiment, without the luxury of wishful thinking. He held the rifle and looked around the perimeter. His eyes found Sarah. She was still on the ground beside Sherwood. Her hands were steady, her face turned toward the ridge for just a moment, reading the terrain the way she read everything quickly, completely, without appearing to look. "Calloway," Trent said. Briggs moved forward, not aggressively but decisively. "Sir, with respect." "Step aside, Chief. She is a corpsman. This is not her function." "I know exactly who she is." Trent's voice had the quality of something compressed under enormous pressure for a very long time. Not loud, not hard, final. "Move." Briggs looked at Voss. Voss looked at Sarah. She had heard every word. She was still kneeling beside Sherwood, hands doing what they needed to do, and she had heard every word, and she was very still in a way that was different from her usual stillness. Her usual stillness was professional. This was something older. "Calloway," she looked up at Voss. "Can you take this shot?" The question sat in the cold air. On the ridge, Cole tracked movement through his binoculars and said nothing, which meant the window had not closed. She looked at the rifle. She looked at the ridge. She looked at Sherwood, who was breathing the way she had told him to breathe, whose color had stabilized, who had given her what she asked for, and was holding on. "Yes, sir." She got to her feet. Briggs did not step aside immediately. He let 1 second pass and then another, and then he moved, not because he was convinced, but because the decision had been made by the appropriate authority, and he understood the difference between his job and his opinion. She took the rifle from Trent. Her hands knew what to do. They knew before she asked them. The grip, the weight, the balance of the M24, different from the rifle her father had used to teach her, but not different in any way that mattered, because the principles were the same, and the principles were what he had taught, not merely the mechanics. She checked the chamber. Loaded. She checked the scope. Set. Cole. Target is static at the corner, wind 6 to 8 from the northwest. She went to the ground. Not the way people go to ground when reacting. The way people go to ground when the body knows the exact angle, the exact distribution of weight, the exact position of the elbows before the mind has finished giving the instructions. She settled the bipod. She found the scope picture. She found the target. 820 meters, not an extreme distance under good conditions. The conditions were not good, dark, variable, wind-cold barrel. And she had not done this in 10 years. She breathed in. 4 counts. Behind her, nobody made a sound. Her mind went somewhere she had not planned for it to go, the way minds go to important things without asking permission. She thought about the kitchen in Colorado Springs, the specific quality of the light in there on a winter evening, the way her mother stood at the counter with her back turned while she waited for her eyes to stop doing what they were doing. She thought about the words she had said standing in that kitchen and the feeling of meaning them completely. She thought about what she had believed that promise cost and what she had believed it protected. She thought about Sherwood on the ground 4 feet behind her, breathing slowly because she had told him to, still here because her hands had been here first. She thought about the road, the only road out, directly in the sight line of the man on that ridge. She held the breath. 7 counts. Her finger found the trigger. Not pulling, her father's voice clear as the day he first said it, not pull. Squeeze. Like you are closing your hand around something you do not want to break. She squeezed. The rifle moved. The report arrived in the compressed, too close way sounds arrive when you are their origin. Cole watching through binoculars. 1 second. 2. Miss, he said. 9 inches right. Target is moving. The target shifted along the structure wall, changing the geometry of the problem. She heard someone exhale behind her. She did not lift her face from the stock. She stayed in the scope and read the wind again, which had shifted in the last 20 seconds more from the west, now which explained the right deviation. She made the adjustment. Small, precise. The kind of adjustment that is either correct or it is not, and there is no middle. She thought about nothing for 3 full seconds. That was the real skill, not the mechanics. The mechanics were learnable, and she had learned them in a backyard in Colorado Springs over 5 years of mornings she never told anyone about. The real skill was this, the ability to be, for the duration of the shot, only the shot. Not the evening, not the promise, not the letter she had not yet read, not the question of what all of this meant. Only the reticle, the distance, the wind, the breath, and the space between heartbeats where the world is most still. 4 counts in, 7 counts held. The space between. She squeezed. The rifle moved. Cole nothing for 2 seconds. 3. Then target is down. No one spoke. Sarah stayed in the scope for one full breath, confirming. Then she lifted her face from the stock and looked at the ridge with the direct, unmediated sight of someone who no longer needed the optic to tell them what was there. Down. Static. Not a threat. She set the rifle on its bipod and got to her feet in a single motion. She walked back to Sherwood. She crouched, checked the tourniquet, checked his pulse, checked his color. Still good, she told him. He looked at her. Was that you? Keep your breathing slow. That was you, he said. She did not answer. She was already rechecking the wound dressing with both hands. Her attention returned entirely to the problem in front of her because the problem in front of her was what mattered now. Voss came over and stood above her for a moment. Where did you learn that? She did not look up. My father taught me. How long ago? She thought about the backyard, the fence post, the mornings before her mother woke. A long time ago, she said. I haven't done it in 10 years. Voss absorbed this. He returned to the perimeter without another word, and she understood that he was not finished thinking about it, only that this was not the moment for thinking. Cole passed her and paused for 1 second. He did not look at her. He said very quietly, Colorado State Championship, 2014. Then he kept walking. They moved Sherwood inside at 23:30 once the perimeter was confirmed clear. Sarah supervised the carry, walked beside him with 2 fingers at his neck, her eyes on his face. He was conscious and coherent and trying to be reassuring to the people around him, which was the sign of someone who was fundamentally going to be all right. The base medical team arrived 12 minutes later. She gave them a clean, precise handover tourniquet placement, time-estimated blood loss, current vitals, interventions performed. The lead medic listened and then said, good placement on the tourniquet. It needed to be right, she said. After the medical team had moved through after the reports were started and the protocols established after Voss had gone to coordinate with base security and Cole had gone with him, she went to the small break room at the back of the operations building. She sat down at the table. She put her hands flat on the surface, palm down, and looked at them. Steady. They had been steady through all of it. Whatever she had felt, it had not gotten into her hands. Her father had told her once that steadiness was not the absence of feeling. It was the practice of keeping feeling somewhere separate from the work, so that both could exist without destroying each other. She was 30 minutes past the work now, and the feeling that had stayed separate was beginning to move back. She heard the door. Trent came in slowly using the door frame as a partial support, though he would not have called it that. The adrenaline that had carried him to the gravel perimeter had long since left the building, and the full accounting of what his body had done was arriving now with considerable interest. He had ice under his jacket against his shoulder. He lowered himself into the chair across from her with the careful deliberateness of a man negotiating with pain. They sat for a moment without speaking. Your shoulder needs assessment before you sleep, she said. It does, he agreed. In a minute. She waited. He looked at his hands, then at her. The expression of a man who has decided to say something he has been deciding whether to say for a very long time, and the decision is now final. I knew your father for 4 years, he said, 2000 to 2009. 3 deployments together. Kunar Helmand and one I will not name because it remains classified, and I made a commitment and I keep those. He paused. He talked about you the way some men talk about the thing they are most proud of in the world. Your birthday, the way you shot, the way your mind worked. He told me you had a quality he had never seen in a student, not talent exactly, but something rarer. The ability to be completely present in the difficult moment, to not leave before the work finishes with you. The overhead light buzzed faintly, the kind of ambient imperfection you stop noticing after a while. He died in March of 2009, Kunar Province. You know this. I know what the army told my mother, she said. Killed in action. Taliban ambush. That is true, Trent said, and it is incomplete. The table between them was just a table. She put her hands flat on it again. We were a reconnaissance element. 10 of us plus your father and another SF operator attached for the mission. We had what we needed, and we were pulling out when the contact happened. Coordinated, which meant it was anticipated, which meant there was an information problem somewhere in our chain. We were in a valley, which is the position you do not want to be in when people above you have rifles and intent. He stopped. His breathing was deliberate, each breath carrying a cost. There was one way out, a ridgeline exit to the south 400 meters of open ground before the tree line. The problem was the northeastern corner of the valley, 2 shooters elevated covering exactly the angle we needed to cross. We could not suppress them from our position. To move was to take serious casualties. Serious casualties in that valley with those evacuation timelines meant we were not getting everyone out. He met her eyes and did not look away because he understood that looking away would be a kind of permission he was not willing to grant himself. Your father moved to the northeastern corner, alone, without orders, without discussion. He told me in the 3 seconds he had before he moved that he was going to that position, that he was going to keep those 2 shooters occupied, and that I needed to get everyone else across those 400 meters. He knew what it would mean, she said. He knew. He did not do it because there were no other options. There may have been other options. In combat, there are almost always other options, most with higher costs or longer timelines. He looked at the situation and made a decision that was fast and clear and without hesitation. Trent looked at the table. He held that corner for 11 minutes. 11 minutes is a long time. The room was very quiet. 11 minutes. She had been 11 years old when her father died. She had grown up in that coincidence without ever finding anything useful to do with it. He was decorated posthumously, Trent continued. The citation was classified along with the mission because of the broader operational context. Your mother received a medal. She was told a version of the truth, not a lie, but not complete. The complete version was withheld to protect operational details. He stopped. I have been carrying the complete version for 15 years. I told myself I was waiting for the right time. I think I was also afraid. Of what? Of looking at James Calloway's daughter and telling her what her father did and seeing in her face what I have seen in my own every time I look in a mirror since 2009. She looked at him. You're alive. Yes. Because of him. Yes, 12 of us. She sat with this, not processing it. The processing would take months, she understood. This was something else, simply being in the same room as the fact. Letting it exist without yet deciding what to do with it. He was trying to give me something, she said. The shooting, the terrain reading, the ability to stay present in the worst moments. He was trying to give me something he thought I would need. He told me, Trent said, that the worst thing in the world would be if you needed something he had and he had not given it to you before he left. Deep in her chest, something shifted, not grief, because grief was a landscape she knew every corner of, but something older inside the grief, something that had been waiting for this particular piece of information to make it legible. She understood now what her father had been doing on those mornings in the yard, what he had been saying without saying it, with the rifle in her hands and the light still low. She became aware of her radio. It had not sounded, but she became aware of it the way she became aware of things that were about to matter a fraction of a second before they mattered. It sounded Voss, controlled and efficient and containing exactly what it needed to contain. The perimeter check had found a second point of intrusion. Someone had come onto the installation at a different location earlier, moving slowly enough to avoid the sensors. They were now inside the perimeter, moving toward the operations building. Direction the medical evaluation room where Danny Sherwood lay, non-ambulatory with the base medical team. QRF 26 minutes. She was on her feet before the transmission ended. Behind her, she heard Trent making the sound of a man deciding whether his body's objections were going to be relevant. She did not wait to find out. She was already through the door. The north side of this compound was built across multiple decades by multiple hands with different priorities. Storage buildings, a maintenance bay, a water treatment relay, chain link fencing, repaired so many times it had become a different fence. She had walked it twice since arriving, not because she had been told to, but because her father had told her to always walk the ground before you need it slowly and with full attention, because the most valuable knowledge a person carries is the knowledge gathered before it is needed. She had it now. Cole's voice through the radio as she moved 2 contacts. The first was holding position at the northern fence watching the road. The second had split off and was moving along the west wall of the maintenance bay toward the building where Sherwood was being held. Moving with deliberation, the profile of someone executing a plan, not improvising. The base medical team was inside. Non-ambulatory casualty. No armed support. QRF 24 minutes. She processed this while running and arrived at the calculation before she reached the corner of the storage building. 2 contacts in different positions meant 2 different problems requiring 2 different responses. The team was going to be split, which meant there was going to be a moment when the medical problem and the tactical problem existed simultaneously with only one person who could address both. She had spent her entire adult life preparing for exactly this without knowing it. She came around the west wall of the maintenance bay and stopped. The man was there, 25 feet, pressed against the wall beside the personnel door, dark clothing, long gun slung at his side. His attention was on the door. He was about to go through it. Voss in her earpiece. Calloway hold. Briggs is 30 seconds out. She looked at the man. She looked at the door. She ran the calculation that 30 seconds contained with a non-ambulatory casualty on the other side of it, and she did not hold. She moved to the corner of the structure, putting herself between the man and the door. Her Glock was up. Her voice carried everything required and nothing extra. Step away from the door. He turned, fast, trained fast. His hand moved toward the slung weapon. She put 2 rounds into the ground between his feet. The universal language for the next round has a different address. He stopped. On the ground. He went down. Briggs arrived 11 seconds later and took the situation from her with the efficiency of long practice. She handed it to him without ceremony and turned toward the personnel door. Inside the base, medic looked up from Sherwood's cot. Sherwood was awake, pale alive. The medical team had held their position and done their jobs. She was checking the tourniquet when the radio gave her the second problem. Cole's voice measured and exact. Northern contact is moving. He's got elevation on the east building roofline. Line of sight on the road. A half-second pause that contained its entire meaning. Renner went down in the dark, right wrist on a concrete edge. He cannot shoot. I have the rifle. I do not have the shot at this distance. 890 meters, northeast. Elevated position, irregular light, variable wind. She heard the distance. She heard who had the rifle. And she heard the word road, the only evacuation route for Sherwood, when QRF arrived. She looked at Sherwood, his color, his pulse, the tourniquet that had been correctly placed and was doing its job. You're stable, she said. I need 2 minutes. He looked at her steadily. He had heard the radio. He understood what 2 minutes meant. Go, he said. She went. Cole was on the northeast corner of the operations building, prone behind a low concrete barrier, the M24 on its bipod, his eye at the scope and his jaw carrying the particular tension of a man who sees what needs to be done and knows he is not the one to do it. He was a good operator. He was not a precision shooter at this distance under these conditions, and he knew the difference between good and what this required. She came down beside him without being told. He moved without being asked. She settled into the position with the economy of someone for whom this position is not a performance, but a return, the body finding something it has always known, even after years of putting it away, 890 meters. The target was using the corner of a roofline structure as a rest, his silhouette breaking the skyline with enough clarity through the optic to work with. The wind had shifted since the earlier shot, more from the west now. She made the adjustment in her head before she made it on the scope. She breathed. She let everything that was not the shot go somewhere else for the duration of what came next. Not suppressed, relocated. Her father had been very clear about the difference. You do not force the difficult things away. You give them a place to wait. You tell them, I know you are here and I will come back to you, and right now I am doing something that requires all of me, and you will wait. They waited. She was in the scope. She was in the wind. She was in the calculation. 4 counts in, 7 counts held. The space between heartbeats where the world is most still. Squeeze, the rifle moved. Cole, 1 second, 2, 3. Target is down, clean. She was already in motion up from the position, rifle handed to Cole in one fluid exchange, moving back toward the maintenance bay door before the echo of the shot had finished traveling. Inside, straight to Sherwood. Tourniquet check. Pulse check. Color assessment. 45 seconds of confirmation that the previous 8 minutes had not undone the previous 93 minutes of correct work. Still good, she told him. I heard 2 shots this time, he said. She was already rechecking the wound, dressing, both hands fully occupied with the work in front of her. Different shot, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then Doc. Thank you. She did not answer that. She was not built for answering that, and he seemed to understand this because he did not press it. He closed his eyes and breathed slowly and let her work. Outside, QRF had updated their ETA to 18 minutes. Voss's voice in her earpiece, both contacts secured perimeter, clear holding for QRF arrival. The situation had acquired edges now. It was becoming manageable in the way that dangerous situations become manageable when the active phase ends and the management phase begins. She stayed beside Sherwood until it was time to hand him over. Briggs was standing beside the maintenance bay door when she came out the second time. He had watched all of it. He had taken custody of the first contact and then remained at the corner of the building because something told him to stay. And he had watched her come out of the door, move to Cole's position, settle behind the M24, make the shot at 890 meters, hand the rifle back to Cole, and walked directly back inside to the casualty she had left stable 63 seconds earlier, the whole sequence beginning to end without pause, without hesitation, without any visible seam between the two entirely different things she had just done. He stood there when she came out, and he looked at her without the appraising quality that had been in his eyes since day one, without the professional skepticism that had been his default since she arrived, without anything he had been carrying when he first walked past her in that hallway 4 days ago. Cole was beside him. Cole had the quiet expression of a man who identified something a long time ago and waited for everyone else to catch up, and now they had. Voss came around the corner of the building. He looked at the rifle in Cole's hands. He looked at Sarah. He did not ask who had taken the shot. "Both problems," he said. "Yes, sir." "Sherwood?" "Stable, ready for transport when QRF arrives." He nodded once, the nod of a man updating something permanently. He went to his radio. Briggs waited until Voss was gone. He had been holding something in his right hand since she came back through the door. She had been aware of it without looking at it directly. He held it out now. A trident pin. The Naval Special Warfare insignia worn smooth at the edges in the way of something carried for years. His. 19 years, he said. 19 years I have been doing this job. I have worked beside good people. I have worked beside the best. He met her eyes with the directness of a man who has decided that the cost of this honesty is worth paying. I have never watched anyone do what you just did. Not either thing separately. Both things at the same time in sequence. Because both needed doing. He looked at the pin in his palm. From the first morning I was wrong about you. Not about the one. I am never wrong about the Joe. About you. He extended his hand. You earned this more than I had any right to question. She looked at the pin. She thought about her father, who had never once asked to be recognized for anything, who had told her that the only recognition worth having was the kind that came from people who understood what the work cost. Briggs understood what this cost. He had spent 19 years accumulating the knowledge of what this cost. She reached out and took the pin from his palm. She held it for a moment in both hands. Then she put it carefully in the front pocket of her jacket. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. He walked away, not because he was done with the moment, but because he had said the necessary thing, and anything more would have been something other than honest. The debriefing was conducted the following morning in the main operations room. Voss ran it. Cole and Briggs gave their accounts with the precision of men who have learned that accuracy is worth more than narrative. The base security officer was present. A JAG representative was present. Two people from the installation's intelligence function said very little. Sarah gave her account when asked. Times, positions, assessments, actions, outcomes. She did not characterize her own performance. When the JAG representative asked her twice to clarify the decision to engage with the Glock rather than wait for armed support, she explained both times in the same words that the support was simultaneously engaged elsewhere, that the threat was seconds from a non-ambulatory casualty, and that the assessment indicated lethal force was not required and had proven correct. The JAG representative wrote something down. Commander Trent was in a chair that Cole had quietly positioned near the door before anyone else arrived. He did not speak during the formal portion. He sat with the stillness of a man in significant pain who has decided that this hour requires his presence regardless. Specialist Harlan Webb was there too, recovered from his heated emergency on day 2, carrying the slightly chastened expression of a man who knows he was the example that set something in motion. When Sarah caught his eye across the room, he gave her a brief, sincere nod. She returned it. When the formal structure of the debrief dissolved into smaller conversations, Brigadier General Holbrook arrived. She had been told he was coming, a brief reference in the morning's communications to the program oversight officer, requesting a direct briefing. She had not expected him to come to the operations room personally, and she had not expected when he came the quality of attention he brought into the room with him. He was 63 years old with the bearing of someone who had spent 4 decades making decisions that mattered. 3 rows of ribbons. A face that had stopped apologizing for itself a long time ago. He came in, took in what was there to be taken in, spoke briefly with Voss, and then turned and looked at Sarah. She was at the medical station restocking her kit, her back to the room. She became aware of him before he spoke. She turned. He looked at her for a long moment. Not the first day appraisal. The considered look of a man reading a situation that has already resolved and arriving at conclusions. "Tell me the name of this corpsman," he said, addressing Voss. Looking at her. "Voss HM2 Sarah Calloway, sir. Best I've worked with." Holbrook held her gaze. "I read the preliminary report this morning. Both interventions." "Sir?" "The tourniquet placement. Standard procedure." The base medic said textbook in under 40 seconds from point of contact. She said nothing. The shot at the maintenance bay, and then the shot at 890 meters, and then straight back to the casualty. The casualty needed monitoring, she said. The shot and the monitoring were the same problem. He was quiet for a moment. What else do I need to know? She thought about what the question was actually asking. Then she said, the program needs a formal integrated medicine component, not supplementary core. The division between medical capability and tactical capability is a structural problem. Last night demonstrated that, but it was not the first time that problem has appeared in operational environments. She paused. I have ideas about what that would look like. Holbrook looked at her steadily. I imagine you do, he said. Written proposal, 2 weeks. He paused. I assume you have been writing it since you arrived. Yes, sir. Something moved briefly in his expression in the neighborhood of a smile. Then he moved on to the next conversation he needed to have. That evening after the security debrief, and after Sherwood had been moved to the main medical facility, and after the course had been formally suspended pending security review, Trent found her in the equipment room. She was conducting a full inventory of her medical kit for the third time. Not because it needed a third pass, because her hands needed something methodical, and her mind needed the space that methodical work provides. He came in slowly carrying the full cost of what his body had done the night before. He sat in the folding chair against the wall. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and removed an envelope. She recognized this category of object, not this specific one, but this category. The kind that lives in the interior pocket of a military man for years carried close to the body, because proximity is the only form of safekeeping that feels sufficient for certain things. The paper was the color of old cream worn at the fold lines. The seal was intact. The name on the front was written in a hand. She recognized the way you recognize the handwriting of people who taught you to write not the specific letter forms, but the quality behind them, the particular pressure and angle of someone's relationship to a pen. Her full name, the one her father had always used when he was being serious. She did not move toward it immediately. He wrote it the morning before we went out, Trent said. I did not know he had written it until 3 weeks later when personal effects were processed and a sealed envelope addressed to you came through the administrative chain to me. I was listed as his liaison officer and it had been flagged as sensitive. He paused. I opened it. I should not have. I did. She looked at him. It was addressed to me in a cover note. He wrote 2 letters that morning, one to your mother through official channels, one to you with a note asking me to give it to you when you were ready. His exact words, you will know when she is ready. Give it to her then. Trent looked at the envelope. I have been carrying it for 15 years waiting to know. The equipment room was very quiet. Last night, Trent said, I knew. She crossed the room and took the envelope from his hands. She held it carefully the way she held everything that mattered with full attention and the understanding that the weight of a thing is not a problem to be solved, but a fact to be honored. She did not open it in front of him. That was not what this required, and he understood this without being told, because he had known her father, and her father had known what things required. You came out to the perimeter last night, she said. Nobody ordered you to. No. You could have been seriously hurt. Yes. Why? He thought about this honestly. Because he gave me everything, he said. 12 lives, including mine. And I have been sitting with that for 15 years without knowing what to do with it. When you walked through that door on the first morning, it understood that this was what I had been waiting for, not an opportunity to repay something, because you cannot repay something like that, I am old enough to know that, but an opportunity to be present, to do what I still could. He looked at his hands. It was not enough. It never could be. But it was what I had. She looked at the envelope in her hands. She thought about her father getting into the vehicle in front of their house in Colorado Springs on a September morning, with a bag on his back and turning to look at her one more time, the way he always looked one more time. She had waved. She could not remember if she had said anything. She had been 11. She had thought there would be other mornings. She put the envelope in the front pocket of her jacket beside the trident pin. Thank you, she said to Trent, for keeping it. On the nod of a man setting down something he has carried for a long time and finding his hands lighter than expected. She returned to her kit. After a while, he left. When the room was quiet and still, she sat down, took the envelope from her pocket, opened it, and read what her father had written on the last morning of his life. The letter said what she had thought it would say. About the shooting, yes, about the 2 things a pair of hands can do, and the importance of never being ashamed of either. about the mornings in the yard and why he had taken her out there and what he had hoped she would carry from them. But it also said things she had not expected, about her mother, about the kitchen in Colorado Springs, and the promise she had made there, which her mother had told him about in one of their calls and which he had thought about carefully. He had written, "I am glad she promised. It means she understood the cost." The people who do not understand the cost do not promise, they simply do whatever they were going to do anyway. She understood it, and she promised regardless, which means that if the time ever comes when she needs to break it, she will understand exactly what she is giving up, and she will give it up for the right reason, and that is all I have ever wanted for her. That she does the hard thing with her eyes open. She read that part 3 times. Then she folded the letter along the original creases and put it back in the envelope and sat with it in both hands for a long moment in the quiet equipment room in the cold November night, in the place her father had always told her to return to when the work was done and the feeling that had been waiting needed somewhere to go. Both hands, always both. Epilogue. Fort Carson in May was different from Fort Carson in November. The mountain was still there. It was always still there, but the light had changed and the cold had softened into something that permitted color, and the base had the quality of a place that has processed a difficult thing and resumed its pace and found that the pace has been subtly altered by what it went through, which is always the way with things that survive difficulty and remain intact. The classroom held 16 people. Corpsmen and combat medics from 3 different units selected the way people are selected for things that do not yet have established precedent on the basis of demonstrated capability and the judgment of officers who had decided that demonstrated capability was the relevant criterion. They were not the kind of people who usually sat still in classrooms. They sat still in this one. The board at the front read Integrated Combat Medicine, Cohort 1. She had written the curriculum herself. 4 weeks. Holbrook had read the proposal in 48 hours, called her for a 90-minute conversation in which he asked specific difficult questions and received specific direct answers, and at the end of it said, "We are doing this." The proposal had taken 4 weeks to write and most of a professional lifetime to accumulate. Some things are written, for they are written. Danny Sherwood sat in the front row. He had requested a position as assistant instructor for the first cohort, approved on the basis of his first-hand experience with the curriculum, which was one way of describing having been stabilized by a tourniquet in Sector 4 while the theoretical framework was being worked out in real time. He walked without a limp. He had a scar on his upper thigh that he showed to anyone who asked which in the culture of the people around him was most of them. He wore it the way people wear evidence of something that could have gone much worse and did not. Kyle Decker was at the back of the room distributing training materials. He had requested a transfer to a unit offering more integrated training opportunity, and the request had been approved, and he had sent her a brief professional email to say so. She had read it twice and filed it carefully. Specialist Harlan Webb recovered from his heat emergency on day 2 of a course that had become considerably more than a course, had submitted a formal commendation letter for Sarah's file. She had read it, filed it, and called him to thank him, which had required him to spend several seconds collecting himself before he could respond professionally. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Briggs had been assigned as a guest instructor for week 2. He had accepted without being asked twice. Commander Trent was in a chair at the side of the room, his knee finally being addressed properly after months of being managed with the dignified stubbornness of a man who considers medical compliance optional, attending the first session as an observer. He had not been invited. He had simply appeared, and nobody had told him he could not stay. She stood at the front of the room and looked at 16 people who had come here to learn something she had spent most of her life learning without knowing she was learning it. On the table beside her, a medical kit on the left, a training model M24 on the right. Neither object was more important than the other. Neither was sufficient alone. She thought about the morning she had arrived at Fort Carson in November, the bad coffee, her name at the bottom of the roster, the way Briggs had walked past her without speaking, the way Voss had not included her in the brief. She thought about what it had felt like to stand at the edge of things, patient doing the work in front of her, trusting that clarity would arrive when it was needed. It had arrived. She looked at the board, she looked at the table, she looked at Sherwood in the front row, and Decker at the back, and the 14 others who had come here to learn what she knew. "Everything in this room is going to be hard," she said. "Some of it is going to feel impossible. That feeling is data. Pay attention to it, and then do the work anyway." She paused. "The job is not to be the best medic or the best shooter. The job is to be present for whoever needs you in whatever way they need you with whatever you have in your hands at that moment. Some days that is a tourniquet. Some days it is something else. Most days it is both, sometimes in the same 60 seconds. Silence in the room. You do not choose between the needle and the rifle. You carry both. You decide which one the moment needs. And she let that settle. By the end of week 1, every person in this room will place a tourniquet in under 30 seconds in any light condition. By the end of week 2, you will understand why that skill and the skills in the second half of this course are not opposites. They are the same thing, which is the most important thing this course will teach you, and I cannot tell you what it means. You have to learn it by doing it. That is the only way it becomes yours. She looked across the room one more time. Questions before we begin? No questions. She moved to the medical kit. She unzipped it. She began laying out the components in order: tourniquet, combat gauze, hemostatic agents, pressure dressings, with the efficiency and precision of someone for whom this motion is no longer procedure, but language, the only language that has ever felt entirely native. A shorter version of something she had said was circulating now in unit communications and training documentation in a forwarded email that Cole had sent her without comment from a unit at Camp Lejeune she had never interacted with. 4 words that had apparently detached from their origin and begun traveling on their own, which is what true things tend to do, drag them out alive. She had not known she was coining them when she said them. She had been answering a question from a student in a pre-course meeting, asked what she considered the operational philosophy of integrated medicine, and she had said it without thinking, the way her father had always said the truest things, simply directly, without realizing they would carry. She had called her mother 3 weeks ago from the parking lot of the building where she had finished the curriculum. She had sat in the car in the dark and called the number she had called more times than she could count. And when her mother answered, she had said, "I want to tell you about Dad, about what he actually did, about what I found out." Her mother had been quiet for a long time after she finished. Then she had said, "I always knew it was something like that. A man like your father. It was always going to be something like that." They had talked for 2 hours. At the end, her mother had said, "He loved you so much, you know that." And she had said, "I know." And her mother had said, "I think he would be very proud of you, not for any specific thing, just for who you are. He always said you were going to be exactly who you are." She finished laying out the medical components. She looked at the 16 people in front of her. She thought about her father, who had taught her that the only 2 things a person truly owns are their work and their presence, the quality of attention they bring to what they are doing and to the people around them. Who had told her that steadiness was not the absence of feeling, but the decision to keep feeling somewhere that did not interfere with what needed to be done. Who had gone into a valley in eastern Afghanistan and made a decision that was fast and clear and without hesitation, because he was the kind of person who made decisions like that, and because 12 people he was responsible for needed him to. She picked up the tourniquet. "We start here," she said, "because this is where it starts. You pull one of these tight in under 30 seconds, and you may be the reason someone makes it home." She looked at them. "And that is worth every hour of this room." She began. Her hands did not shake. They never had.